Yo, 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 what is up? Welcome back to the Father Built Podcast. This podcast is all about building up fathers in holiness, healthiness, and happiness while giving them the tools to build their house of legacy. I am your host, Bobby Peacock, and I am glad to be here. Now, for those of you guys that are watching, you're seeing that it is just literally me this week. Um, and I'm gonna break that down kind of what we're doing here. So every time that I have a guest on, the next episode will probably most likely be a little bit shorter, which is okay, but we're going to break down something that just really stood out to me. Um or a couple things that stood out to me, and so that's kind of what we're doing here. And this part is really just for the men, whether you are a father, whether you're single, whether you are a husband with no kids. This part is really for you. So this is me kind of coming at it from a little bit of a single dude's perspective or a man's perspective. And every once in a while, I'll have another guest on here to help me break this down. And I have to apologize for this up front. I'm sorry for if my voice sounds a little nasally. I've been dealing with sickness all week. Like, I took my son on a mini vacation and he was all snotty, and then I accidentally drank out of his lemonade after he drank out of his lemonade. And so now I'm like, great. I'm just dealing with this sickness. And so here we are. We're still here. I'm still alive. I'm still breathing. Praise the Lord. So, if you haven't listened to the last episode that featured John Setzer, a close friend of mine, a good friend of mine, feel free to jump back and listen to that episode because we're here to talk a little bit about that. We're here to break down a couple things that he said. So, let's go ahead and jump into the first thing. The one thing that I loved, and I'm gonna paraphrase this. I want to put this disclaimer out there that these are my words, not John Setzer's words. This is the BLP version, the Bobby Lloyd Peacock version of what John Setzer said. This is my interpretation. If it's a direct quote from John or any of my guests, I will let you know. All right, disclaimer over. But something that he said that really stuck out to me is when he was I gave this big old elaborate introduction to him, and then I gave him a chance to really introduce himself, and he said something on the lines of like, "Man, I just want to be known for Jesus." And that's for being a believer. And I was like, man, that was a bar, like an absolute bar right there. And it really comes back to understanding what identity is. What is our identity? And before I jump really deep into identity, I do want to say this is like the way that I see the world is through a biblical lens, or another example would be a biblical filter. So, for example, the world's going to come out and the world is going to say like something random, right? So then I use my Bible as a filter, and then whatever comes out, that is how I see the world. Or maybe it filters the good from the bad, and then I have to reflect on, okay, is this beneficial to my walk with the Lord or is it not? Now, let me tell you, I'm not perfect at this. Because why? I'm a human and I make mistakes, just like you make mistakes, and she makes mistakes, and we make mistakes. Like, everybody makes mistakes. There's no one that is perfect, not one. And so that's kind of how I see the world. So, uh, and the other thing too is like, not only do I see the world through a biblical lens and have a biblical filter, but I also try to have a biblical foundation. And so what that means is that my foundation is set on the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. And so what that means for me is that, like, as I move, my foundation moves with me. but it never changes. And so, because it is a very core value that I have, there may be other things that may change around me, or may change the way that I see things. But at the end of the day, my foundation will never change. And so how does that really play into identity? Well, the world tries to say that us as men, or us, or just people in general, that the world says, well, you're this, you're that. And sometimes as men, we forget that, like, whoa, wait, just because the world is saying one thing doesn't mean that I have to identify with that. Now, I have to be very careful with this because um, we can go in a lot of different directions with that. But obviously, there's foundational truths. And so we're sticking to those. So I don't want to make this all political. So we're just not going. Okay, we're going nonpartisan here, but biblical. Okay. And so, like, let me give you a prime example of this, right? I grew up in the foster system, 10 different foster homes, 3 different children's facilities, 2 failed adoptions. The world said, hey, you have a 30% success rate. The world says, hey, you're most likely going to end up in jail by the time that you're 18. The world says you're not going to be a contributing member to society. Those were things that the world said. But at the end of the day, God said, nope. God's like, nah, man, this is my child. This is my kin. He has been adopted into my household. So, thus far, he is going to be a contributing member of society. He is going to be successful. He is going to grow up and be a, a decent man. He is going to be a good father. Because, like the world said, oh, you didn't have a consistent father in your life. Well, you can't be a consistent father. But God said, yeah, well, just watch. And so when it comes to that identity piece, so often in times we believe what the world says about us. We believe that, oh man, because we're a man, we have to watch out for the word masculinity. Since when? Since when was masculinity a trigger word? For real. I'm gonna get on this tangent real quick. You know, like we talk about the word toxic masculinity. And people don't understand where that word really came from, and what it really means. And I would challenge those of y'all who are out there to actually research where toxic masculinity came from, and then see it in the world's context and say, oh, this is taken way out of context, because masculinity isn't always toxic. In the world that we live in, masculinity is actually needed. And so is true femininity, if I said that word right. Both of those things are needed in their true design, the way that God designed it. You want a healthy marriage? Let your wife be feminine and you be masculine. You want to be in healthy relationships with people? Understand your masculinity. Understand what God has designed for you. And so going back to identity, and I know I'm kind of, excuse me, I know I'm kind of all over the place, and I apologize. Still getting to this, still getting used to this, doing this whole podcast thing. But when it comes to identity, it's really understanding like who you are and who you created to be, because God created us to be someone. He created us to live out our purpose. And like John Setzer says, like our purpose, it never changes. Like that's part of our core. Now how we live out that purpose and how we interact with that purpose may change over time, but our purpose never changes. Um, and so for me, like when people come up to me and say, like Bobby, like what do you identify as? And like I said, we're doing this nonpartisan, but I tell them, man, listen, I identify as a child of God. So thus far, I am a believer. I identify as a father because that's the second thing that's most important to me. And then third, I identify as a single black man. Why? Because I am single and ready to mingle. And sometimes I want to let people know. And the reason why I say black is because, what? I'm proud of being black. Just like people should be proud of their heritage. People should be proud of being, Indian, Caucasian. Like my foster parents are Dutch. They should be proud for being Dutch because that's part of their heritage, right? Now, I'm not saying like it's not necessarily like a pride thing, like white pride or black pride, but it's a thing of like, man, like you see it, so let's acknowledge it. Simple as that. And so for me, that's how I identify myself. Those are three things that I'm like, hey, I'm just gonna call it out. And so for you, you have to understand like how do you identify yourself, and is it healthy? And I'm not saying that like my answer is everything and I know or my answer is perfect and I know everything, because I don't, because I am still learning, I am still growing, but that's just something that I do. And so with this identity piece, it's really just talking about like how you don't have to let other people identify you. Like for example, I was having a conversation with a friend at the bar, and I was telling them when I was going through my divorce, like I had to be okay with the world identifying me as the villain in the narrative. Because at the end of the day, did I make mistakes? Absolutely. Did I own up to those mistakes? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, I know that I was redeemed in Christ, and I knew I was redeemed in the Lord. So thus for my identity was not the villain, but I was okay with people seeing me as the villain because I knew who I am. Or for example, I had another friend come up to me and he was talking about another person out in the world that was saying like that I'm a horrible father, that I'm this and that I'm that and the other, and I got emotional. I got upset about it. And then my friend, he was just like, "Yo, yo, yo, like, you good?" And he kind of talked me down, and then I kind of just realized I'm like, okay, hey, I have my emotional moment, but at the end of the day, this person's words, like, I don't have to identify with because I know who I am. Most importantly, the Lord knows who I am. And my 12 ride or dies, guess what? They know who I am. And so for me, it's understanding like, okay, I'm okay with how the world sees me, but I'm also going to say, yo, world, that's not who I am, but only if I need to. Only if I need to stand my ground. Otherwise, like many greats, just learn how to operate in silence. I don't always have to stand up for myself. I don't always because I could have went to that dude and be like, "Bro, you don't know me. You don't know who I am," and I could have got real ghetto, like real ghetto. But I chose no. I'm a keep it 100. I'm gonna keep it above, and I'm gonna keep moving because he don't know me, and I barely know him. So his opinion doesn't really matter to me. And so it's understanding your identity, understanding who you are, who the Lord has made you to be, and operate in that narrative instead of the narrative that the world tries to put on you. Now, I was going to talk about this conversation in a whole different episode, but man, John Setzer, he said something so good that I'm like, I got to talk about it. Like, so as many of y'all know, like I'm a single dude, and like for me, I'm a package deal. Like, it's me and mini me. You get both or you get none. And so for me, when it comes to the world of dating, first of all, it is so messy. It is so ugly. It is so nasty. Like, it is trash. Like, I envy the people who are married and have been married before the digital age because man, oh man, like the dating apps, the going on dates and investing not only time but your finances, man, it makes me want to stay single the rest of my life. But I do have a desire to be married, so I am going to go after that. um but John, he said something so good. He was talking about the wife versus woman versus girl, right? And like to me, it's just like, man, like there are so many men out there that are like, yo, I'm just trying to find the girl. And it's like, bro, no. Or I'm just trying to find my woman. I'm like, bro, no. Like you gotta find yourself a wife. And you're looking in all the wrong places. And like for me, that just really resonated with me because as a single guy, like I want to date with purpose, not pressure. And so what does that mean? I have a list of 22 things that I want in a wife. Now, I'm not saying she has to be all 22 of those things, but the first 7 she has to have. No questions asked. Now, that list I'm not going to share because I hold that dearly close to my chest, and to my heart. That's the same thing. That's funny. Anyways, and so for me, like I have that list of 22 things, but then I have to also understand out of those 22 things, am I operating in those first 7 well? And then am I operating in the 22 things as well? And so, like, I guess I'll share one. Like, obviously, like, my future wife, she has to love the Lord. Like, she has to really love the Lord, just like how I love the Lord. I mean, she has to also love me. That would be a plus. Love my son, that would be plus. And so, that's like 3 things on the list or whatever. But for me, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, hey, do I love the Lord? Do I love myself? Do I love my son? And like some people, they look at lists and they say, yo, you shouldn't make a list. And hey, if you don't want to make a list, that's okay. That's fine. You do you, boo boo. You do you. But for me, it's a set of standards. And so when I am dating with purpose, not pressure, for me, it's like a fact finder mission. So what do I mean by that? Dating with purpose is like, hey, oh, you link up, meet up with somebody and you start talking, and where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Oh, that's cool. Okay, you're single. Oh, yeah, blah blah blah. Like, do you want kids someday? And you just say it casually, right? Because like I feel like so often we wait till we're in the relationship to ask some of these more difficult questions. Or like for me, I'm just like, nah, I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste your time. So let's handle all the difficult questions up front so that we can move forward and figure out, hey, is this a right fit for us? And if it's not, then we can leave well and drama free. Like I've had, I think like five people, when I was on the dating apps and stuff, where we would start talking and then we'd get to a phone call and a FaceTime and we found that it just wasn't a good fit. It wasn't the right fit. It wasn't the right time. And for me, it was like, okay, like I move on. And so for me, it's like that's what it's like dating with purpose and not pressure. It's like I hate to say it, but like my heart is not all the way in until a lot of those questions are answered. And now when I say that, like I would say it's more of it's not a wall. It's not a wall. It's more of a guardrail because the Bible talks about guarding your heart, right? And so not only do I want to guard my heart, but I want to make sure that their heart is being guarded as well and that the Lord is guarding their heart as well. And so for me, asking those questions, asking uh, some of those quote unquote hard questions up front, because then we can eliminate some of the damage in the back end if it doesn't work out. And so for me, that's the difference of like dating with purpose, right? And like the pressure, there's so many people who date with pressure where they're just like, I just want to be married, I want to find my man, I want to find my girl, I want to get married, and then everything will figure it out. They have the pressure of society, and it's like, people ask me all the time. It's like, well, Bobby, you've been divorced for so long, and it's like, well, why don't you got a girl yet? It's like, well, I haven't met the right one yet, and I'm okay with that. And I say I'm trying, but you know what? Until that, excuse me, until that time, like I'm just going to be chilling with the Lord and chilling with my son. And I'm okay. I'm genuinely okay with that. And I'm still moving and operating. If I see a cute girl and be like, "Yo, what's up, girl?" I'm just kidding. I ain't like I'm not like that. But I might give her a handshake and say, "Hey, my name's Bobby Peacock. What's your name?" And then start a conversation, kind of thing. And so, for me, I don't want to date with pressure. Too many people date with pressure, and when you apply too much pressure, what happens? Things explode. And I don't want to explode. And that was a notification. We're just keeping this raw, transparent. Um, and so like for me, there's a difference between, a woman and a wife. Right? Like even like women say, "Oh, there's too many boys." Well, guess what? Reality is there's a lot of girls out there too that are playing around in the streets, and then once they get my age or whatever, um and same with the boys, there's plenty of boys that are playing around in the streets as well, and when they get my age they're like when they get my age they're like, I'm done playing around in the streets. But what do they have left? A whole bunch of trash and a whole bunch of baggage that they're bringing to the marriage table that they have to sift through. And majority of people don't sift through that garbage. They don't sift through that baggage before they got married. Now, I'll be fully transparent with you. When I got married the first time, which was my first marriage and my only marriage, at the time of this recording, I didn't sift through all of my baggage. And so what ended up happening is some of my childhood trauma came out in my marriage because I didn't properly deal with it. I thought I did, but I didn't. And so because I didn't deal with it, it got brought out in my marriage, and it got brought out in a way that was not healthy. And so for me, if I can prevent someone else from doing that, of like, yo, if you're a guy listening to this podcast, I'm just going to be 100% raw and 100% real with y'all. Y'all need to learn to keep it in your pants until your marriage. Because what ends up happening is, as you're collecting bodies, you are also giving away pieces of you. And a lot of times, like as guys, because guys tend to be more physical, but even within that physicality, there is still an emotional connection, intimacy connection that happens. And a lot of guys, we like to push that down because we just want to have that physical interaction. We want to get the girl, and then we're done, we throw her to the side. But what happens is, when that physical intimacy happens and you don't keep it in your pants, and having that outside of marriage, you are becoming one with something that you cannot get back. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not perfect in this area. I've grown in this area. I was a virgin till I was 23. Before my ex-wife and I got married, we had sex outside of the marriage. And so I'm not perfect in this area. And so, but like for me, knowing what I want and trying to learn from my mistakes, I know, yo, I'm gonna date with intentionality, I'm gonna date with purpose, and I'm gonna keep it in my pants until I'm married. Is it the most easiest thing to do? No. But when you have an accountability partner that comes up to you and says, hey, bro, when's the last time you did it? And you have to be honest with that person. Whew. Plus I'm in ministry too. So what does that say? Like, to the Lord? What does that say to my ministry people? What does that say to the donors? If I'm out playing in the streets. And so it's like I'm living with a higher standard. And like, I mentioned this earlier, but intimacy. I want to talk about this too. A lot of times in a dating relationship, we look at intimacy as physical. But that's not the only intimacy. See, there's, and I'm probably not going to get all of them right, but I would say these are the top types of intimacy. Obviously, the most known is physical. But what about mental intimacy? What about spiritual intimacy? What about emotional intimacy? I would say those are probably the top 4 intimacies. I feel like there's one more that I'm missing. But what happens is, if we go for the physical intimacy right away, well, what if we don't have that mental intimacy like taken care of, right? Yeah, I can take care of you physically, right? I can take care of you physically. When it comes to that intimacy, we can cuddle, we can do that da 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 kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Y'all know what I mean. We can do that. I can take care of that girl. But what happens when you get in a fight? Or do you know how to mentally connect with that person? Like, what if that person was like really into science, and you're like, nah. So can you mentally stimulate that person? Let's talk about spiritual, which I think is one of the most important ones. Can you spiritually connect with that person, right? Like, are you going to the Lord? Is she going to the Lord? And are you worshiping together? Are you praying together? Are you fasting together? Are you going to church? Are you reading the Bible together? Are you doing that? Or are you just out there just ba, 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 kind of thing, right? Anytime you hear me doing that, y'all know what it means. It means when a man loves a woman, that's what it means, like sex, okay? Anytime you hear me go, la, da, 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 I'm talking about that, okay? I'm cracking myself up here. But can you can you relate with them and have that spiritual enemy or intimacy or emotional? Like, can you emotionally connect with them? And so often I see, because I like to hang out at bars and I like to talk with people. Um, and I remember I was talking with a flight attendant, and she was talking about like, man, like I just I just don't understand like how like I'm still single and like and I have two kids and like no man wants me and I just straight up asked her. I'm like, okay, here's a question: when you're dating with somebody, like how often do you ba, 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 how often do you put out? And she's like, every time. I'm like, that's her problem right there, because you're immediately going for the physical. You're immediately going for the physical intimacy instead of having your mental, your spiritual, and emotions intimacy taken care of. And so that's why it's not working out. It's as simple as that. Just imagine if you had a spiritual connection so strong, so deep with somebody, a mental and emotional connection that was so deep with somebody, and then you got married, right? And then all of a sudden you get that ba 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 when a man loves a woman kind of vibe, and then bam, like the connection will be so so much better. Trust me, so much better. But like John said in our last conversation, is like, man, how often do people are like, you know what? I want the McDonald's filled with um not probiotics, but like chemical burger instead of like the organic fed, grass fed Wagyu steak. Yeah, it's gonna cost more. Yes, it's gonna take more time to make. Yes, you're gonna have to set up a reservation. But let me tell you something. When you take a bite of that, it'll make so much more sense and it'll taste so much more better than trying to feed your hunger now. And I'm going off on a tangent, but I'm just saying, like, for me, I want to have a spiritual connection. I want to have an emotional and mental connection. And obviously, there has to be, an attraction there. But, like, I'm not just attracted to physical. Uh, there's that emotional, that spiritual, there's that connection there as well. And that goes before the physical. Listen, you can be a Dane. Like, you can be gorgeous, super gorgeous. But if you do not love the Lord, you can walk your fine self out the door because you are not the one for me. And if you can't connect with me spiritually, emotionally, physically, because, girl, I got needs. And so do you. And if we can't meet those needs, then bye, Felicia. Bye. Because there's not going to be that da 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 before any of that before marriage. And so I just feel like there's a lot of guys out there that are like, yeah, well, I'm a physical guy, and like I need that part in my life. And it's like, nah, man, like you have emotions. It's okay to be real and raw with your emotions. It's okay to say, hey, like this is who I am. This is why. Because at the end of the day, the reason why people are doing that da 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 outside of marriage is because they're trying to fill the void. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's this. Maybe it's that. Um, and so it's just a matter of like understanding where that's coming from, figuring out the root cause, and moving forward. And so, Man, talk about tangent. We just going in. So if you are a single guy listening to this, just know that there is hope. There is hope for you. You can move forward. You can operate in a way that is good, that is holy, that is above ground. Um, and even if it's just, man, you like writing down your list, write it down. Figure out, like, okay, this is what I want in a future wife. And then ask yourself, like, man, like, is this who I am? Have I achieved this yet? And if you haven't, then don't be out there dating. Yeah, I get it. We're all a work in progress. Trust me. Listen, I'm a work in progress. I'm a huge work in progress. But I know if I'm not meeting my standards, like my minimum standards, then I'm not going to be out there. And so I feel like if more men were like, yo, I want to be out there trying to find a wife instead of a girl, we would operate differently. So differently. And so I was all over the place on that. But set a standard. Keep the standard. Know your identity. Know who you are and whose you are. And like, even if you don't like obviously, like for me, I have a biblical worldview. And I'm not trying to push that on anybody, but that's my foundation. That's my filter. That's who I am. And let's say you don't have that. I would challenge you first and foremost to find that, to pray to God and be like, God, find me where I'm at. And maybe you are so stubborn that you don't even want that. Well, then I'm going to tell you, brother, good luck. But then the other part of it, though, too, is like, if you don't want it, then hey, this podcast is for you because you're going to grow. Even if you take all the Christianese, for those who aren't watching, I'm doing the quotes with my fingers, the Christianese language out. There's still stuff that you can pull out of this that can help you. And so, anyways, like I said, this part of the podcast is mainly just me talking with the camera, giving some real raw thoughts. Like, this is uncut, unfiltered. Yeah, like you're gonna hear it all. Uh, and these are just thoughts from the last podcast. And so, like I said, every once in a while we'll have a guest on here that will be breaking down the podcast, and we'll be talking back and forth of our thoughts, kind of like a co-host kind of vibe. But right now it's just me, and I'm okay with that. And so, but if you've made it this far, like, one, I really appreciate you listening to this podcast. I really appreciate you wanting to grow in your masculinity. And like I said, this is for the men that are out there. Whether you are a single, whether you are a father, or whether you are a husband, like this podcast is for you. This part of the podcast is for you. And like, if you aspire or you want to be a father, or you're dealing with fatherhood trauma and you want to hear from other fathers, like, this podcast is for you. So I want to thank y'all so much for listening. Ooh, let's try that again. I want to thank y'all so much for listening into the Father Built podcast, where we build up fathers in holiness, healthiness, and happiness, and we aim to give them the tools to build their house of legacy. My name is Bobby Peacock. You can find me on Instagram, DJ_Peacock. Yeah, thanks so much for watching. And always remember, peace, love, blessings. We are out.